Hello and welcome to another episode of The Three Techs. I'm your host, Tony Tang, and I'm joined tonight by Bob Fairbairn. Hey, Bob.
Good evening.
And Stephen Bramson. Hey, Stephen.
Hi there.
Now, we did a previous show on the Rode PodMic and the Shure SM7B, comparing the sound quality between the two. And Bob, what happened there?
Some of our viewers thought you weren't fair, Tony. They said that you were too far away from the PodMic and you were too close to the Shure SM7B, and it wasn't fair. And so let's make it fair. You have a good idea, I think.
Let's do this. Bob, I think what people were talking about on the comment section was just that there's this proximity effect that happens as you move closer or further away from a dynamic microphone, especially one that's cardioid or figure 8 pattern. Yep. The PodMic, the Shure SM7B, they're both cardioid patterns, so as you get closer to them, it does amplify the bass frequencies significantly, yes, which can give you a fatter sound. Now, you may notice that for this particular show, I am talking very, very close to the PodMic. In fact, my lower lip is touching it, and you might actually see the stand shaking a bit because I'm touching it. So it is a thicker, fuller sound. And if you are working on a dynamic microphone and you want that fuller sound, that's a way to get it. But as I move away from it, yes, definitely the sound gets thinner, as you just heard right there, right?
Yes.
I must point out that camera perspective also plays a big factor into this. And in order to eliminate that, because it's hard to judge how close I am to the microphone based on the height of the microphones, that's not a good way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn them to the side, and you'll see me from the profile on the side, and I'm going to test the mics at different distances, and we'll talk about how they sound.
Perfect.
Sounds great.
First things first, what I'm going to do is turn off all of the processing on the Rodecaster Pro so that you don't hear any of those compression, de-essing, effects, processing effects. So let's do that now. All right. So I'm back at the PodMic, and you can hear what it sounds like with all of the processing turned off, a bit more neutral. I have the PodMic going into channel 1 and the Shure SM7B going into channel 2. So I'm going to switch between the two. Now I'm going to turn these microphones 90 degrees. And that way you can see exactly how close I am to the microphones. I'm going to do the same thing with the Shure. So for the first round of testing, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my lips touching the microphone grill, so right on top of it, as close as you can get without eating the mic. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells by the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells. So now, let's do the same thing on the Shure SM7B. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells on the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells.
At least for my ears, the Shure was just smoother, I would say.
There's something in the Shure where the mid-range of your voice is held up better than on the PodMic. I think it's the middle tones in your voice are just, they're, as Stephen said, smoother.
What about some of the, like the mouth noises, the plosives, and things like that? Did you hear any difference between the two?
The PodMic you may have had a little bit more of breathiness, so you could hear your breath when you were close to the mic. That was the only thing I think I noticed.
Yeah, maybe a bit more spitty.
Possibly.
On the PodMic, yeah.
Okay, so that was with my mouth touching the front grill or foam on the microphones, and I do admit that when you are that close, you get that emphasized bass frequency, and it fills out the sound more.
Yep.
But I think that Bob and Steven, you guys mentioned some other things. Let's go to the next step. And let me switch back to the PodMic. So now on the PodMic, instead of being right on top of it like this, I am going to be 2 finger lengths away. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells on the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells. Now, onto the Shure SM7B, again 2 finger lengths away. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells by the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells.
The PodMic was thin, very thin. And the Shure it's quieter because you're further away, but it maintained the overall quality of your voice better.
Yeah, so the PodMic just went tinny, and the Shure was just still smooth and professional sounding.
So that was a 2-finger distance, which is still pretty close to the microphone, but your lips aren't touching it. So I would say that that is about 1 inch to 1.25 inches distance away. I think that most guests, when they come into a studio, they're going to want to maintain some level of distance away from the microphone. They're not going to want to get right on top of it and have their lips touching it. But if you're hosting your own show and you're the only person who's going to be using this microphone, sure, you can get right up close to the microphone to get that extra bass boost to fill out the sound of your voice. All right, so that was 2 fingers. Now let's go to 4 fingers and a thumb, just kind of like this. So let's switch back to the PodMic. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells on the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells. Now let's go over to the Shure SM7B. Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. Did Peter Piper pick a peck of pickled peppers? If Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, where's the peck of pickled peppers Peter Piper picked? She sells seashells by the seashore. The shells she sells are surely seashells. So if she sells shells on the seashore, I'm sure she sells seashore shells.
Yeah, on the PodMic, you just sounded sort of thin and far away. And again, the Shure was just smooth and pro.
The PodMic went down in audio quality quite a bit, and the Shure pretty much maintained.
I think that the frequency response definitely is a little bit more dramatic, maybe. The changes, at least, are more dramatic with the PodMic as you get closer and farther away from the PodMic. So if you want to get that full sound with the PodMic, definitely get as close as possible as you can to it. My concern and caution to anybody who's considering doing that, again, would be plosives and other sort of mouth and breath noises, as those seem to be emphasized more or more prominent on the PodMic when you are that close when compared to the Shure.
So, Tony, compare what you did this evening to what we did in that show when we first compared the 2 microphones.
In the video that we previously did, I definitely was not right on top of the microphone. That is not how I intended to use the microphone. That is not how I expect my guests to use the microphone if they were to be on our podcast and show. I would estimate, based on the distance that I was using in that previous video, I was between 2 to 5 fingers away. So I would say maybe about 3 inches away from the microphone. And I think that's a comfortable working distance that most people, most guests, would use this microphone. But again,
Okay.
if you want to be right on top of it and you're the only person using the mic, I think it sounds very close in terms of the fullness of the sound to the Shure, but there are some other subtle differences that you might hear.
Okay. Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that.
All right, well, thank you so much, everyone, for letting us know what you thought about our previous comparison between these 2 microphones, and we wanted to make sure that we followed that up to talk about the proximity effect and to show you what these microphones sound like at different distances. Let us know if we left anything out here and what else you'd like to see more of in the comments. Subscribe, ring that bell, give us a thumbs up, please, if you like this and like to see more of this. Until then, we'll talk to you next time on the Three Techs.
Okay. I noticed you backed away from the pod mic.
I did, because I just don't want
Yeah,
to
you don't
talk
want
to
to
it
eat
so
the damn
close.
thing.